We hear a lot of talk of reform in Olympia. What does this mean, and what types of reform do you think Washington could use?
Well, primarily, if we want to get Washington working again, meaning if we want to create policies that help and foster the success of the middle class, we want to work on private sector reform, and that would be workers' comp. NFIB released a poll around the state of Washington, and all employers across the state of Washington ranked workers' comp as their biggest hindrance towards hiring. And who do employers hire? Primarily the middle class. Transparency would also be necessary, as well as rewarding entrepreneurship, meaning rewarding the behavior, those men and women who risk their life savings to create jobs.
Have we seen similar reforms work in other governments?
Ironically, yes, and the assumption is that a lot of the great reforms we've seen have been by large countries. But ironically, we're seeing some of the smaller countries make significant reforms. Sweden comes to mind as a country where in the 1970s they were very much a tax and spend and realized that it didn't work. In fact, in the 1970s, they were ranked the 4th richest in the world, and around 1993, they were ranked the 14th wealthiest. They had fallen 10 spots primarily because of huge tax and spend policies that did not work well.
What do these reforms do for the economy and for the people of Sweden?
It's a good question. A lot. Now, Sweden is not perfect, but they are a model. For instance, their overall debt is 0.3% of their GDP. America's 7%. So they've done a lot by getting the government under control. When you have debt truncated, or when you have less debt than normal, then what that does is main thing it does is provides consumer confidence for consumers. Wall Street Journal often reports that 2/3 of our economy is predicated on consumer confidence. It has a huge impact on consumer confidence. If we look at the entrepreneurial activities such as Skype, such as Spotify, such as Angry Birds, those are all coming out of Sweden. And so there is some economic activity, and there is definitely a connection between budgets being in line versus debt-ridden United States, where they're out of line. Our consumer confidence index is up and down daily, primarily because of those numbers.
And what can you as a lawmaker learn from what's going on in Sweden and apply it to what you're doing in Olympia?
So as you know, I adjunct teach at Whitworth University, and one of those classes is economics. I always encourage students to take a broad view. In fact, it was Dwight Eisenhower himself who said whenever he had a problem and he couldn't quite find the answer, he enlarged it. So if we enlarge our economic problem and look around the world to other countries, there are things to learn from countries like Sweden. One, we learn that when you get your debt under control, great things can happen again. And if there's one thing the United States should take from Sweden, it is we need budgets on time, and we need budgets that will help restore consumer confidence, that will foster economic development.